Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Prostate Forum. And thank you for being here for the last 2024 presentation on Zoom, when we certainly hope to see you again on the fourth Thursday of January at 5 p.m. Pacific for our first presentation of the new year. We are delighted to and I'm going to ask for your help. We're delighted to welcome Dr. Lorelei Mucci. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
It's super close. Lorelei Mucci.
Mucci.
Yep.
With she is director of Cancer Epidemiology and Cancer Prevention Program, Department of Epidemiology at the Harvard and T.H. Chan School of Public Health. She is going to share with us all kinds of things about diet, lifestyle, how men can live their best lives with a prostate cancer diagnosis, and her work aims to turn data into answers that will help men manage and navigate their prostate cancer journey. About tonight's presenter, after receiving her doctoral degree in epidemiology at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, Dr. Mucci trained as a postdoctoral fellow in cancer epidemiology in Sweden. In Sweden, she gained expertise using nationwide health registries to examine cancer etiology and formed a long-term partnership with epidemiology colleagues in Nordic countries. Her primary faculty appointment is at Harvard Chan School, where her research uses integrated molecular epidemiology approaches within cohorts in the United States and globally to investigate research questions focused on cancer etiology, mortality, and survivorship. Now, without further delay, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Mucci, and I will stop sharing, and that way you could put your slides up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's really just a wonderful pleasure to be here. Can you see my slides? Fantastic. That's great. So actually, as an epidemiologist, one of our main objectives is to use to study populations of people in order to understand why disease happens, after something happens, how to prevent progression of disease, quality of life. I've been really interested in prostate cancer for about 2 decades now. And I would say when I joined the field, there were so many things we didn't know. There were all these treatments we didn't have. There was very limited, compared to other cancers, very limited research going on. And so I think this is an incredibly exciting time for me to be a researcher in prostate cancer. And I think we know so much more now than we did really even in the past 5 to 10 years. So I wanted to kind of just start thinking with all of you about when we think about survivorship and prevention, what are the things that are important for individuals after a diagnosis of prostate cancer? And so these are data, actually, a colleague of mine, Caroline Himbert, she was a postdoctoral fellow with us, and she just got her first faculty position at Huntsman Cancer Center in Utah. And she asked the question, which is, when we think about survivorship and survival holistically, what are the main causes of death that we need to be thinking about for prevention? And so in this curve, this is looking at a large population of individuals diagnosed with prostate cancer, and this was all sorts of stages and grades of prostate cancer at diagnosis. The upper left were patients who had a low grade and a low stage of cancer. On the right are individuals maybe with Gleason 7 tumors or maybe a little bit more advanced stage, and the lower left are those individuals with the highest risk of sort of metastasis. And what you could see over 25 years of follow-up, what are the main causes of death? So we have in light blue are deaths from prostate cancer, pink is deaths from cardiovascular disease, and the green, it refers to deaths from other causes. And I think what's really important to take home is, while prostate cancer death is something really important to think about for prevention, most individuals with prostate cancer are eventually in their life, and we all will die. The hope is that we die much, much later and live healthy lives throughout that time. So what we really also want to think about, besides prevention of death from prostate cancer, is prevention of death from cardiovascular disease and these other causes, such as other cancers, respiratory diseases, et cetera. And then also thinking about survivorship and the way that we can improve survivorship, whether it's through diet or lifestyle, or all the aspects of quality of life for patients, whether it's sexual and urinary function, sleep quality, which is such an important factor for patients with prostate cancer, improvements of cognitive health, which can be really impacted by things like androgen deprivation therapy. Also, just a few others, thinking about cardiovascular health and cardiometabolic health after cancer diagnosis. So really, when I think holistically, and the way that lifestyle and diet might improve survivorship, thinking about these large domains of health. So I'm going to spend a fair bit of time today talking about the way that we think about diet, and really trying to provide you with what I think are the most evidence-based dietary factors that can improve prostate cancer survivorship. The field of diet and cancer has really changed over time. We used to really focus in on individual foods, and you might have heard information about the benefits potentially of foods such as broccoli or other cruciferous vegetables, cooked tomato products, potential harmful effects of dairy products. So those are thinking about individual foods and the way they may impact health. You also may have heard studies about what we call macronutrients, or things like dietary fats, proteins, et cetera. Micronutrients such as specific vitamins and minerals, or even phytochemicals, which are compounds that are found in plant-based foods, or even things that happen after foods, such as what happens during cooking, carcinogens or contaminants that can happen, for example, when you grill or char meats. What I'm really going to be talking about today, though, is thinking about foods in totality together, and thinking about the patterns of foods that we eat in the diets that we consume, because what we've realized that really it's more important than any one specific individual food or macro or micronutrient, but really thinking about the foods that intersect with each other, the components of these foods that are interacting together. And so I'm going to be talking about some dietary patterns. And in particular, we're going to be speaking about 4 dietary patterns as they relate to prostate cancer survivorship. 2 of these are dietary patterns that are common in different populations and have some interesting health effects. And then 2 of the dietary patterns they're going to be talking about were what we call our empirically derived, or dietary patterns where we looked at specific foods as they relate to biomarkers both of inflammation and insulin. And sorry, my dogs are in the background. I don't know if you can hear them right now. They're barking away, so I apologize. So I just wanted to also tell you a little bit about a couple of the studies that I work on at the Harvard School of Public Health. These were large populations of individuals. Actually, when we started following them back in the 1980s, all of them were initially free of any type of cancer. And these were all close to 80,000 individuals who were they were health professionals themselves, so they were physicians, dentists, veterinarians, and other health professionals. And the idea was that these are individuals who both could provide high quality health information and also would want to be part of a study of health for a long time. And in fact, now 40 years later, still about 90% of our participants complete our regular questionnaires about their diet, lifestyle, medications, and health outcomes that they have. They provided us with various biospecimens. And in this cohort of about 80,000 individuals, unfortunately, 12,000 of them have developed prostate cancer. You can really see the high burden of prostate cancer in this cohort. So I'm going to be talking about some data that we've we've generated within these cohorts. So I just wanted to talk about those cohorts a little bit. So the first dietary pattern I want to talk about is the Mediterranean style diet. And you may have likely have heard about this dietary pattern. And it was actually derived based on the observation that during the mid, say, 1950s, 1960s, certain populations in Greece and southern Italy really had very low rates of chronic diseases and really a high adult life expectancy, despite the fact that they had limited access to healthcare. So investigators, including actually my PhD supervisor, started to ask the question, well, what were the components of diet in these traditional Mediterranean populations? And what were the common features of the diet? So at the bottom of the pyramid, those diets had a lot of fruits and vegetables, a lot of grains, mostly whole grains. Olive oil was actually the central vegetable oil in the diet. Also, these diets were rich in things like beans, legumes, and also this there's an interest in Mediterranean style diet about the herbs and spices used in cooking. So these were part of an element of every meal that was consumed. Another core element of the Mediterranean style diet is that fish and seafood are really consumed quite often. They're the primary source of animal protein in the diet. And then poultry, eggs, cheese, and yogurt are consumed, but a little bit more moderately. And then red meat and sweets are consumed less often. And then another interesting thing about the Mediterranean style diet is that a key component is integrating physical activity. And this is not necessarily running a marathon, but really walking together, dancing, tennis, whatever exercise that you'd like to do. And so what do we know about Mediterranean style diet with respect to prostate cancer outcomes? These are data that were led within those cohorts that I described, the health professionals follow-up study by a postdoc in our group that looked at overall mortality after prostate cancer diagnosis in about 5,000 patients. And I just want to kind of orient you a little bit to this figure. So when a lot of times in epidemiology, we present what we call relative risk estimates. So we say, what is the risk of mortality in this group compared to some other group? So in this figure, we're looking at the relative risk of any cause of death during 20 years of follow-up, comparing groups that were most likely, and this is on the right, most likely to consume a Mediterranean diet compared to those with the lowest likelihood. And their estimates, if your estimates are above 1, you're more likely to experience mortality, and if you're below 1, you're less likely to experience mortality. So what did the data show us? Well, the top 20% of individuals who consumed a Mediterranean style diet had about an 18% lower risk of mortality over 20 years of follow-up after their prostate cancer diagnosis compared to that lowest risk group. And you sort of see this dose response relationship. So every additional likelihood you're going to be eating more fruits and vegetables, more whole grains, more fish, a lower risk of death. And we, in particular, while we saw a slightly stronger effect for individuals whose cancer was diagnosed at a more localized stage, we still saw benefit even for individuals diagnosed with more advanced prostate cancer. What was also really interesting to us was that we saw a benefit and a lower risk of cardiovascular mortality for individuals on androgen deprivation therapy, which is important because we know androgen deprivation therapy can lead to, cardiometabolic effects and some weight gain. And I think that's a really important finding. There's actually been, unfortunately not in prostate cancer patients, but in cancer-free individuals, there's been a large randomized trial in Spain where they randomized 20,000 individuals either to their usual diet or to a Mediterranean style diet. And in these populations, and I think this is really relevant for prostate cancer patients, there was a lower risk of overall mortality, which is what we saw in our study of prostate cancer patients, lower risk of cardiovascular disease, of diabetes, and lower weight gain, which including in prostate cancer specific patients. Sorry. In addition, in the trial and as well in other studies, there seem to be benefits on lowering the risk of cognitive decline, increasing the likelihood of healthy aging. And also there's been randomized trials, small ones, but in patients living with prostate cancer, that a Mediterranean style diet may actually beneficially impact quality of life, such as improvements in fatigue. So I think there's a lot of great evidence for cancer survivorship of a benefit of a Mediterranean style diet. Now, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a second dietary pattern called a plant-based diet. It's similar, but it has some differences to the Mediterranean diet. And this is not a vegan or vegetarian diet per se, but really emphasizing plant-based foods. So again, whole grains, fruits and vegetables, nuts, legumes. Really I want you to focus on this right column, the healthful plant-based diet, which kind of looks differently at healthy versus less healthy plant-based foods, and then reverse in the score for animal foods. And these were data led by my colleague Stacy Loeb, who's a urologist at NYU. And this is in a cancer-free population. And what we saw was that individuals who were more likely to regularly eat a diet, and again, not a vegetarian per se, but more plant-based foods, had a much lower risk of prostate cancer, particularly fatal forms of prostate cancer, particularly among individuals less than 65 years. And another important study that's also working with Stacy found among about 3,500 patients looking at quality of life. About half of them had undergone surgery, about 35% radiation, that a higher plant-based diet was associated with better sexual function, less urinary incontinence and obstruction, and better bowel function. So again, I think there's a lot of other data, not in prostate cancer patients, suggesting benefits of adhering to a plant-based diet for lower risk of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, lower weight gain, and as I mentioned, better quality of life. So the next two diet patterns that I'm going to talk about are thinking about two important features that fuel growth and development of cancer, one being higher insulin and one being inflammation. And we think that there's really three, what we call the cancer triad, three key components that drive high insulin and drive inflammation. One is a more Western style diet, so less plant-based foods, less like the Mediterranean style diet. One is less physical activity. And both of these on their own can drive insulin and inflammation, but they can also indirectly affect not only overall obesity, but a specific type of obesity, which happens as we get older, but it's that more central obesity, or what we call the visceral obesity. And this is really more of the biologically active form of obesity. And so the good news with that, though, is through exercise and through diet, you can really have benefits for this type of obesity and thereby decreasing insulin and inflammation. So a colleague of ours, Fred Tabung, who's now an assistant professor at Ohio State, derived two dietary patterns based on biologic markers of either inflammation on the left or insulin on the right. So he asked the question of these many different food groups, which are the ones that are positively associated with high insulin or high inflammation on the right, or inversely associated with high inflammation or high insulin. And what was really interesting to see was there were actually a lot of similarities with high inflammation, high insulin. So red and processed meats, starchy vegetables such as potato products, people who are consuming more refined grains or sugar-sweetened beverages. These were factors that were driving both insulin and inflammation. Interestingly, on the flip side, coffee is really interesting as a food group. It's been shown in clinical trials to regulate insulin. It's a high antioxidant. So quite interesting that associated with both lower insulin, low inflammation, as were vegetable, fruits, and those were the main components lowering insulin and inflammation. Now, what was interesting also for foods that were only related to insulin were low-fat dairy products, butter, eggs, and poultry, but a lot of that poultry was fried poultry. So what did we find for survivorship? Well, these are data looking at the anti-insulinemic diet. So it's very similar to what we saw for the other dietary patterns, was that the more likely you were to consume less of this insulinemic diet, the more benefit you had for lowering your risk for mortality. And similarly, we saw a benefit both for individuals with low risk prostate cancer as well as advanced prostate cancer, as well as individuals even who appear to have a higher body mass index. So I think that was really interesting. And there's a lot of benefits more broadly for eating diets that lower insulin and lower inflammation for longer term health effects. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about physical activity. So these are unpublished data. So these are data that we participated in. It's a project that's being led by my colleagues at the American Cancer Society. It's looking at very large groups of patients, including, if you can see in this bar here, studying 24,000 prostate cancer patients, looking at how physical activity, and this could be engaging in, say, 2 hours of vigorous activity. So that could be playing tennis, it could be running, depending on how you play pickleball, it could be pickleball, or moderate activity at about 5 hours per week. So that could be things more like walking, for example, gardening, etc. So what you can see across for many different cancer types, that physical activity might be one of the best things one can do to lower the risk of overall mortality. And in fact, a consensus panel looking at all of the evidence found that about 38% of prostate cancer mortality can be lowered through regular physical activity. So again, this isn't running marathons. This could be about 20 minutes a day of more vigorous activity, or it could be around 40 minutes a day of walking. So thinking how you can integrate physical activity into your regular daily lives. And I love the idea we were talking about this group walking. I think it's fantastic. I think the more you exercise, there's also such great evidence of benefits for exercise in prostate cancer patients for improving cognitive function, improving cardiometabolic health, potentially improving, there's different types of exercise. For example, there's a lot of interest in whether things like Kegel exercise before having radical prostatectomy could lower the effects of incontinence, for example. So I think the health benefits of physical activity together with diet are really, really important. So I'm going to, I have a few more slides talking that I wanted to talk about around genetics. And then I remembered there was somebody in the group who was very interested in the role of infections in prostate cancer. So I have just one slide or two talking about that. So prostate cancer, unfortunately, is one of the cancers that has the most important role that inherited factors, genetic factors play. So if you compare other types of cancers, prostate cancer really stands out as the cancer where germline genetic factors, so the germline that you get from your parents, increase the risk of prostate cancer. About 57% of the variability in prostate cancer risk is due to inherited genetic factors. And what I think the really good news is that we've really started to identify what those genetic factors are. And there's kind of two different types of genetic factors. One are genetic factors that generally in the population are pretty low, but for certain reasons seem to increase the risk of prostate cancer and they can be quite common in some families. Interestingly, some of these genes look quite common if you know much about breast cancer. So genes like the breast cancer associated 2 gene, the breast cancer associated 1 gene, and other genes in DNA repair pathways. So again, in the regular population, their prevalence is pretty low, but they increase the risk of prostate cancer, and their prevalence can be fairly high in some families in prostate cancer patients. The other types of genetic variants are interestingly variants that each on their own don't really have a strong effect, but together can really have a large effect. And now there's been large studies that have identified a number of variants. So I just wanted to present this data here. This is looking at the lifetime risk of prostate cancer if you have one of these the breast cancer 2 gene that I mentioned. What you can sort of see by age 50, the lifetime risk of prostate cancer is so in all individuals, about 1 in 8 individuals in the US will be diagnosed with prostate cancer. So that's about 12%. By age 70, if you carry a BRCA2 mutation, that lifetime risk goes to about 1 in 5. And by age 80, it's over 1 in 2. A little bit less for BRCA1. So really you can see these are things that are rare in the population, but if you have them, can really increase risk. And then similarly for these genetic variants, they really can have an impact overall prostate cancer and lethal prostate cancer. So we know a lot about the genetic factors, and we're starting to think about these genetic factors for early detection and whether you could take all this information and identify groups of individuals who really should be screened earlier. The other way we've been thinking about it is if you're at high risk of prostate cancer because of genetics, can you lower that risk? We know we can't change our genes, but can we change it through diet or exercise or other factors? I think the really good news is yes, at least based on early studies. So what we found was that despite the individuals who had a high genetic risk of prostate cancer, if they ate a Mediterranean style diet, were low in insulin diet or low in inflammation diet, they were much more likely to reduce their risk of developing lethal forms of prostate cancer overall. We also looked at a healthy lifestyle score integrating not only diet, but physical activity, healthy body weight, and not smoking. And similarly, despite what the genetic susceptibility of prostate cancer and the 2 panels on the right, really you could reduce your risk substantially of fatal prostate cancer in the future, particularly by keeping a healthy body weight and engaging in vigorous activity. Again, not running a marathon, but really up to 20 minutes per day of vigorous activity. So finally, the last couple of slides around infections and prostate cancer. Again, somebody had asked me about this, so I wanted to present this. So in terms of cancer overall, infections are attributed around the globe to about 15% of the cancers that are caused globally. Lots of different cancers, and they can happen. We think these infections can happen 2 different ways. One, viruses can actually integrate themselves into a human DNA and lay there and cause mutations. Also, other types of infections can actually lead to a lot of inflammation locally and may help fuel the growth of a cancer. These are some of the cancers we really know a lot about with respect to infections and cancers. So cervical cancers is one where nearly all of cervical cancer is due to a virus, human papillomavirus. Stomach cancer, about 90% of all stomach cancers are due to an infection, H. pylori. Liver cancer also is predominantly associated with infections with, again, a type of virus. Hepatitis virus is predominantly. So for prostate cancer, I just wanted to share this as the final slide that I have. There's been some well-done studies. There's been some really not well-done studies, and I think we still don't really fully understand whether these infections can cause prostate cancer. They're tough because when these infections might happen might be 30 years before the diagnosis of prostate cancer. But there is some interesting hypotheses. But again, I just wanted to present this because somebody asked me about it. So I think probably the most consistent evidence, but still unclear, is around human papillomavirus, which is a virus. And particularly, these are the subtypes that are found with other cancers like cervical cancer. So maybe that this virus can integrate into DNA, it can ascend into the prostate and cause mutations. There's a common infection, trichomonas. It's the good news, it's common, but it's easily treated. It's a parasite. There's kind of mixed evidence. There's some studies suggesting particularly higher risk with more advanced prostate cancer, some studies finding no association, but sort of interesting evidence. There's some things like E. coli, which can infect the prostate and lead to a genotoxin. So there's some interesting evidence there. And then there's some studies a little bit less convincing, but some evidence around a couple of bacteria that may also lead to infection of the prostate and therefore may be a risk factor for cancer. So I just wanted to present this. Happy to talk more about it if you want to. So just in summary, and we talked a lot about diet, I think what we've really learned about diet and prostate cancer outcomes is I think the patterns of diet are probably more important. And they really will look at the synergistic effects of food, and they really can provide evidence about what to eat and what not to eat. And those 4 dietary patterns I talked about, they had some differences, but they also shared some common features. So diets that reduce the intake of red and processed meats and probably have lower dairy, particularly interestingly, the low-fat dairy that seem to be the ones that are driving inflammation. Really emphasizing healthy plant-based foods, whole grains, etc., and healthy fats such as olive oil. Avocado can be a great oil as well, or avocados themselves instead of butter. And I think really starting to see that the benefits of diet and physical activity, not only for reducing mortality, but improving quality of life. And I hope this talk also kind of emphasized both, one, the importance of genetics in prostate cancer, but that genetics are not deterministic, that we might be able to offset the genetic risk of prostate cancer through a healthy diet and through physical activity and healthy body weight. And just to summarize, I'd like to thank a lot of people that I've worked with on these projects, and I'm going to stop sharing and look forward to any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Doctor. We're going to open the floor to questions. I don't see any in the chat, but I know that a lot of you do have them. If you please unmute yourself,
Neil,
and you're free to ask. Hi, Dr. Metzger.
hi, Dr. Mucci. Thank you very much for this
Nice to see
wonderful
you.
lecture.
Thank you so much.
We've been needing this. We talk about it. We talk about it. There's no evidence. There is evidence, and it's really refreshing to see the real truth about it. I have a couple questions though. We have a fellow in our group that is eating or drinking 2 quarts of carrot juice a day.
Wow.
And he's turning, I'm sure he's going to turn orange pretty soon.
Yeah.
But is there any evidence you're aware of that carrot juice is beneficial at all?
Well, a lot of vegetables, including carrots, share a lot of factors that are really healthy. So, but it might be things like carotenoids, it might be other phytochemicals, but I think my other message around diet is find things that you enjoy eating that are healthy. If you enjoy carrot juice, wow, that is something that probably has a lot of great vitamins, etc., and is part of a healthy diet. I think that's great. If you don't enjoy carrots, find some other plant-based foods that you do enjoy. Because I
Yeah.
think what we're starting to see is it's probably not one specific food, but there's many ways to get to that healthy diet.
Yeah. Well, his vision is 2020, but I don't know whether it's going to do anything for us. The other thing is we had a lecture from the fellow from the City of Hope about using mushrooms
Oh, that's
and
interesting.
active
Yeah.
surveillance
Yeah.
and the change. Is there any information you have on that?
You know, that's such a really great question. There's been a lot of intriguing hypotheses around mushrooms. There are really interesting studies of cells, and I don't even know if mice yet have been studied with respect to mushrooms, but not a lot of great data in people. But again, I think if you enjoy mushrooms, and I think it's definitely part of a healthy diet, there's a lot of intriguing experimental data. Definitely include mushrooms in your diet. It's very interesting though. Mushrooms I feel like are something people either love or don't like at all. And so I think if you like mushrooms, that can be a great way to be part of a more plant forward diet.
Yeah. And then our traditional approach has been to use a heart healthy diet for our men
That's right.
because they are surviving obviously longer. Some of our active surveillance people are pushing 20, 25 years.
That's right.
And we try and prevent the heart issues, which is something that seems to get most of us anyways. But that's kind of like an anti-inflammatory diet more, isn't it?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. A lot of those features of those 4 dietary patterns that seem to have benefits for prostate cancer specifically also really are great because they really target the cardiometabolic benefits of diet. So absolutely, I think what's really exciting with these dietary patterns is they're lowering inflammation, they're lowering insulin, they are having benefits for cardiovascular health, etc. So yes, yeah.
Well, we really appreciate your expertise, and this video is going to get a lot of looks. It's finally get some answers to some of these questions we've been kind of toying with over the last couple of years. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like there's some in the chat, and then yes, I see somebody raising their hand as well. Please ask your question.
You'll need to unmute D and go on ahead. Can you unmute?
Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Yep.
Okay.
I can hear.
Great presentation. Really enjoyed it. Wanted to know what role do electrolytes play? I mean, drinking water is really critical, but they don't have any electrolytes, and I just want to know what your thoughts were on that.
That's really interesting. And actually, one thing I didn't mention around the Mediterranean style diet is it actually emphasizes drinking water as part of, I think water instead of, say, sugar sweetened beverages or fruit juices, which can be high in sugar. So I think from that perspective, drinking water is really important. Electrolytes specifically, I think are really important when you're exercising, in particular, in the climates where you are, where probably the humidities can be low. So I think making sure there's a balance and maybe talking with, an exercise physiologist potentially. But I don't think for prostate cancer specifically, I don't think we've seen a specific benefit one way or the other for electrolytes. But I think as you exercise, making sure that you're not getting dehydrated is really important. But what is interesting to think about with the Mediterranean style diet is they really do emphasize water, drinking water. Yep. I wanted to just mention there was a comment about prostate cancer and COVID infections. So we actually early on in the pandemic, we wrote an article. This is fascinating. So about 50% of prostate tumors contain a type of mutation, genetic mutation, including a gene called ERG. and another gene called TMPRSS2. It brings these two genes together. TMPRSS2, it turns out, is one of the critical genes that COVID needs to be taken up into different cell types. That was amazing, and not only COVID, but also influenza, et cetera. And it's this TMPRSS2 gene is incredibly important for the way that, like, the influenza pandemic of 1918 to 1920 was so virulent. It was because of the way it used the same gene that we know a lot about prostate cancer. So we were really intrigued about whether there might be this connection between COVID and prostate cancer because of this one gene, TMPRSS2. It didn't turn out, well, these two genes both are really important in both of these two diseases. It didn't turn out that, for example, that prostate cancer would facilitate COVID or that COVID would lead to prostate cancer. I don't think, although probably it's too soon if there is a connection to see something going on. So,
Interesting.
yeah. And I'm happy to share that article that we wrote if you're interested.
Please.
Yeah.
Please, if you could send it to us, we'd love that. It looks like Divergence, hold on just a second. It looks like Brian had his hand up. Brian, did you have a question?
Yes, please. A question and a distraught comment. It looks like you're telling this Irishman to quit eating so many potatoes.
I know. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Yeah.
Point made. But then another comment then that you had. So
Yeah.
first I was confused. What's the difference between Mediterranean diet and the plant-based diet? Really what I think you're saying is that there is the Mediterranean diet in its traditional sense, but then you further refine the plant-based into the inflammatory and the insulin type diases. Okay, one intriguing thing just on the side. Recently, one of the health organizations, whether it's the World Health Organization or the CDC or whatever, has said alcohol is never good for you. But alcohol's still on your diagram there. So are we still safe in having a glass of wine with the Mediterranean diet?
It's such a you've raised a whole bunch of really things. Do you see the Mediterranean style diet again, or
right, water and then
here?
water.
Yep. Yeah, so I want to touch on a few things. First of all, I think the thing about potatoes and the potato is such an important food in so many cultures. The concern with potatoes is probably, in my estimation, more about the fact that many people eat it as fried or baked with a lot of butter and sour cream. I think potato on its own still might raise the glycemic index. It might raise your insulin a little bit, but I think if you can tease out, and actually one of my colleagues, if you Google, I think it's the 6 Fry professor, he was really pushed about the health effects of potatoes and about, can you eat any French fries? And he said, I don't know. He said, well, how many French fries is healthy? He's like, I don't know, maybe 6. And so he became known as the 6 Fry French fry potato ex-professor. But I think this goes to the point of it's all about moderation. And when we think about something like potatoes, when we think about something like wine, alcohol is tricky. Alcohol in moderation, I'm talking about for women about a glass of wine or beer or 1 spirit per day. For men, it's about up to 2. Lowers cardiovascular disease risk. For sure, it does. There's many studies to support that. However, it also may increase the risk of certain cancers. So this is where the challenge is. Increases in most of these though are really drinking, say 4 or 5 drinks per day, not drinking 1 to 2 per day. But it does increase many different types of cancers. So I wouldn't want for any individual, I wouldn't want to go against advice of a physician who would say not to drink alcohol. So that's where I'm going to land there. But yeah, but I think the cardiometabolic benefits of moderate alcohol are probably okay, but not in moderation. Yeah.
Well, there's another urologic twist to that you may not be aware of, but my doctor told me I could have 1 glass of wine a day. I have 6 doctors. Mercifully, I'm looking for a 7th. I can't find one.
Right. Ah.
I think what we're going to do, I'm going to go to Divergis, then I'm going to go to Lamano, who has an interesting question about low-fat dairy, and I hope I'm going to pronounce this name right, Sheng Hao Li, who is a pharmaceutical researcher joining us tonight.
Yes.
Let's start with Divergis, and then we're going to go to Lamano and Sheng Hao in that order.
Oh, George, I think you're on mute again.
What do you think of the Tempest blood test studies and stuff like that?
Oh, I think that's a really fantastic question. I don't think I want to address that here. I think I have a great colleague, Adam Keibel, that you should definitely invite to present to your group. He's at Mass General Brigham. He's the chair of urology. He's thought a lot about these types of things. So I would rather someone who's a real expert in that area talk about that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Lamano, you've been waiting patiently. You had a question here about how low-fat dairy drives inflammation.
Yeah, so that was interesting. So actually, was interesting what the data showed was actually a stronger effect for raising insulin levels. So it didn't seem to really have an effect on inflammation specifically, but did seem to raise insulin. But interestingly, the whole milk dairy has not, and we've seen some really conflicting evidence around some slightly more harmful things with low-fat dairy than we do with the whole fat dairy. And it's a big question, why? Is it something about the way that fat is removed from dairy products that might be contributing to this? We're not exactly sure why, but there does seem to be a slight difference in that interestingly and surprisingly, so I actually, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I use whole milk in my coffee rather than low-fat milk. And I don't use a lot. I put a little bit, but it is, and when I eat yogurt, Greek yogurt for breakfast, I do whole milk, whole fat yogurt. But again, we don't know why. There are other things in like zero fat dairy products that also maybe that's contributing, but we don't exactly know why. And then you had another great question about olive oil, avocado oil. How about other vegetable oils? Yeah, I mean, I think there's, I think olive and avocado oil probably rank highest, but I think there's other, regular vegetable oils. I think there's conflicting evidence around coconut oil, which I know a lot of people do use in diet. I might steer away from coconut oil and stick with more neutral kind of vegetable oils. But I think, the hard thing about olive oil is when you're cooking, it doesn't get to a really high temperature, so it doesn't make things as crispy. Actually, avocado oil can get you up that temperature up there. It's expensive, but mixing a little bit of olive oil, say with avocado oil or maybe something like canola oil, can get that temperature up there and has the benefits of it being a plant-based fat.
Shanghai also wants to get into genetics here. Is there any group, race, and or location in the world having much lower risk of prostate cancer
Yeah.
than the average? If yes, any study involving this group?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And prostate cancer is one of the cancers that has the biggest geographic differences around the world. And when we look at, on the one hand, the highest, particularly incidence, but also mortality rates from prostate cancer are in the Caribbean countries, among Black men in the United States, among parts of South America, and then parts of Southern Africa. So those are the one on the highest. On the lowest are many of the countries in Asia, Japan, Thailand, other parts of Asia. So there's really potentially, when we look at even just mortality rates, you can see a 15 to 20-fold difference in those rates. And there has been, especially for diet, really, and the other interesting thing that we've seen with prostate cancer is if individuals move from, say, a low-risk country, and there's a lot of great data from people from Japan who moved to the US to look at cancers like prostate, the rates go up in the migrant population, and then even go up more that next generation of individuals, which can't be genetics only then, right? It has to be something about diet and lifestyle. Could be screening also, screening differences, but it does seem like understanding these differences, whether it's differences in genetic factors and differences in other factors around these geographic differences, really has shed light on some of these clues. Actually, interestingly, Italy has among the lowest prostate cancer mortality, which again, we're like, maybe it is the Mediterranean diet, but it doesn't have to be only Mediterranean diet, right? It could be, what are the diets in parts of Asia? And unfortunately, there just haven't been a lot of great studies yet. But is it, again, high plant-based foods consumed in parts of Asia, certain Asia foods? So yeah, I think it is really interesting.
Why don't we go down a rabbit hole with infectious agents as well? Because certain Kaposi sarcoma with things like AIDS, the cervical cancer and just general cancer breakthroughs with HPV, where there's now a vaccine.
Yeah.
And we were looking at a study in our group with that found a correlation between bovine leukemia virus and breast cancer. So it seems to be an area that's back there. And you brought up
Yeah.
bacteria, which I never thought of.
Yeah.
Let's go down a rabbit hole with that. What are they finding with infectious agents?
For cancer more generally, or
More
for,
generally, yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I can actually pull up, let me just find it. I give a lecture every year in our cancer epidemiology class about infections and cancer. Let me just kind of go through this. Before. Well, I think, let's see, what do I want to show? Well, I think this is sort of, I think, the summary of evidence that the World Health Organization has put together around infections that are determined to be true causes of cancer, and the specific types of cancers that are associated, and cancers where there might be more limited evidence. So Epstein-Barr virus was actually one of the first viruses that we've seen. It's pretty common in the population, but it's associated with a whole range of different types of lymphomas, nasopharyngeal cancer. What's interesting about Epstein-Barr virus is that 90% of people in their life will get Epstein-Barr virus. So the real question is, not only has someone had it, but maybe what age did they have it? When they got the infection, were they able to clear it? Or was it able to, become part of the DNA? So these are some of the questions we're asked. As I mentioned, hepatitis B virus is an established cause of liver cancer, certain types of liver cancer, hepatitis C virus. And these are really interesting because hepatitis B virus now, there's a vaccine that most kids will get. You had mentioned Kaposi's sarcoma, herpes virus, which is the cause of Kaposi's. HIV is super interesting for prostate in particular. So HIV infections increase the risk of Kaposi's sarcoma, non-Hodgkin's and Hodgkin lymphoma, and certain cancers as well of the cervix, anus, etc. Interestingly, and we don't know why, HIV seems to be associated with a lower risk of prostate, a lower risk of breast, and a lower risk of colorectal cancer, and we don't know why. We don't know why. If maybe it's that people infected haven't been able to live long enough until more recently, and so we just haven't been able to look at it. But it's confusing why that is. And then, as I mentioned, human papillomavirus is associated with many different cancers. That's also quite important, given that there is a really good vaccine that exists out there. And then I mentioned Helicobacter pylori for stomach cancer. Then there's these are super interestingly. There's in parts of Asia, there are a type of infection sort of looks like almost like a worm called a liver fluke that can really increase the risk of certain types of liver cancer. And then for bladder cancer, we know it's not very common in the US, but in parts of the world, a schistosoma, which is a cause of bladder cancer. So that's what we know about really established causes of cancer for infections. Largely preventable.
Yeah, it's like you say, preventable. Along with that, I know that you cited some bacterial infections too that could be sexually transmitted.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yep.
I'm going to call on Ira Caggett and then John.
Hello. First, thank you for the very informative presentation and the work that you do to quantify populations. You're using populations to quantify, what we should eat and what we should do. And I know you have a hard task because I know just in my own personal experience, I speak to different people, and one person says have drinks, another person says don't have drinks, and and everybody's an expert. So so
Yeah.
uh, uh, I have I just like to mention, you probably know about it, the China study by T. Colin Campbell. You know about that study, right,
No,
Doctor?
actually, I don't. I'm not familiar with that study. No.
Okay, and I think in the 60s or 70s, uh, the premier of China, uh, he had cancer. He did a census enumeration of the population of China, and so so what happened is they saw that in small towns they really didn't have heart
Yeah.
disease and
Yeah.
cancers and all this other kind of stuff. So this guy from T. Colin Campbell, he's a PhD from, what was it? One of the colleges back east. It's an Ivy League college. I forget the name of it right now. So it was a large, they did a census, they went and they did a survey to find out why this is so. And so what they found was that people pretty much ate a vegetarian-based diet,
Yeah.
a little bit of meat, as a cut, because they didn't have that much money. They did, exercise, the farm work and all this other stuff, and they didn't get these, cancers and heart diseases. Of course, they died from, other diseases, poor man's disease, I guess. So, and he wrote a book called The China Study. T.
Mm.
Colin Campbell, if you're interested.
Yeah, very
And
interesting.
so a lot of people who are vegetarians base their what they do based on this. So anyway, I'm just mentioning that. But I have a question that have a concern. Oil. apparently it's different kinds of oil. Some are better than others. Why
Yeah.
not use water instead of oil to cook with? I know I do now. So, don't you think oils might be bad? What do you say?
Yeah, no, I think I think that's a really interesting question, and particularly you're talking about cooking vegetables, for example. So why,
Or
or
anything, vegetables,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there was this study that I mentioned, this randomized trial in Spain, where they randomized people to this Mediterranean diet or not. And then they actually looked at the additional benefits of adding olive oil or not. And it actually seemed like the Mediterranean style diet plus extra olive oil seemed to be beneficial for cardiovascular disease, for preventing weight gain, for lowering the risk of diabetes, et cetera. So there might be something actually about the plant-based oil itself. But I think if you don't want to cook, we all need a little bit. We actually, our cells need lipids, needs fats, but we need healthy fats. So it's sort of this balance. You don't want to completely deplete your diet from any sort of fat, but you do need the healthy plant-based fat. So, so I think but I think you're right. I think there are oils that have very different distributions of bad types of fats in them. So it's really if you like cooking, I think this is the message I really want to say. There are some overarching themes of things that we know are good. And the way that you get to that diet, whatever you enjoy, if the way you like to cook foods, I think that is great. Now there are just one final thing. There are certain foods that is particularly some types of vegetables, for example, that require cooking in an oil in order for the benefits to come out. One of those is tomatoes, for example. They're rich in a type of antioxidant we call lycopene, but that lycopene is all sort of stored up in the tomato until you cook it in oil. They love lipids. They come out of the tomato in lipids. Don't even have to cook them. You could just take the tomato, put a little olive oil on it, and that's enough. But there are some actual vegetables that become even more beneficial with a little bit of oil. But again, I think if you enjoy cooking with water, I think that's fine.
By the way, I think it was yesterday or today, I was, reading one of these articles, and they're talking about the Mediterranean diet in Italy. And they say it's really not existing much anymore because everybody's
right.
eating, the food, American foods.
Exactly. No, you're completely right.
So
And yeah,
it's history now. It's just
yeah,
like in China,
yeah,
those small towns where they did that study, I think it was in the 60s or 70s. So when they did, I mean, it's all gone. They even have McDonald's
yes.
in China,
Yeah.
so
You're absolutely right. In fact, that's why they were able to do this randomized trial in Spain, was because so many people were not eating the Mediterranean style diet. So they were able to like get 20,000 people whose diets weren't that great to participate. So you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Hello.
but but
Hi.
anyway, the I don't know. The other thing I just like to, it seems to me that there's heart disease, prostate cancer, diabetes, and all this other stuff. Uh, is there? I mean, is it pretty much the same foods for all of them? Eat heart healthy for isn't that what they all eat? But
I
everybody
think,
has a different idea. Like even
right.
among us, who are,
Yeah.
we're all studying this, and like in fact, Dr. Metzger and some of the others and myself, we've had on a discussion about alcohol, where the World
Yeah.
Health Organization says don't zero alcohol is the
Yeah.
right amount, and
Right.
then you see some people say what one drink for a lady and a case of beer for a man, but the thing is, just among us we have differences of opinion.
Yeah, yeah. I think there are many ways to a healthy diet, and I think that's sort of, where I hope that I was with my presentation sort of getting at that but there's some common themes, but there's many approaches to a healthy diet that we really provide good evidence for. But and good for cardiovascular health, good for, lowering the risk of diabetes, good for cancer, etc.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
John, thanks for waiting patiently.
Yeah, absolutely. So I too would like to start with a heartfelt thank you for the work. I hope that on your drive home each evening, you have a sense of the contribution that you're making, because it's real and it's appreciated. I particularly appreciate how you opened it up and sort of demystified kind of the single food villains and saviors from an overall eating plan. That's super helpful. I was diagnosed a little bit over 2 years ago and had begun a Mediterranean diet prior to that, and have hence gone full in. And in there are a few food items that some literature had sort of picked out as bad. And so it's so nice to sort of let go of those niggling concerns that I've had about this or that which is in my diet, when overall it's actually almost perfect. And I would just throw in one other feature of the whole thing is a how I feel aspect to the whole thing. It seems like our system is designed for that, as opposed to a diet rich in meats. It's there are a lot of other benefits to it.
Yeah.
But the primary thing is thanks for your work, and thanks for carving out some of those myths that have had at least me a little bit, not troubled, but I want to do all that I can. And I felt like I was, except for these few things out there. So this is, it's so appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm looking for raised hands. I don't see any. Would anybody like to unmute and ask a question?
Yes.
Hi, Lau.
Hi. I'm from India, and my diet is basically with spices, made of
Yes.
spices and everything.
Yeah.
I haven't had that much trouble before, but lately I've been bleeding, and I was wondering if a change of diet might, especially the stool. I had a radiation done, and
Yeah.
it's basically from the proctitis.
Yeah.
But lately it's been really inflaming pretty badly, and I've gone to doctors. So right now, they're going to do colonoscopy and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you change. The question is if changing your diet might
Correct.
have led to that. It's such a great question. It's hard to give because I don't fully understand all of the things that have gone on with your medical history, but I think making sure that you're both talking with your, cancer specialists. It sounds like you're looped in with somebody run a colonoscopy. I wonder whether somebody who could take a look at the foods specifically that you're eating and how they might have changed, to see if there's anything that stands out to them. It does sound like, getting a good team together to take a look at what might be happening would be really important. But it's a little hard to know the details and to say, oh, it could be or isn't, due to these foods specifically.
But yeah, the diet hasn't. My diet has actually not changed
It
at
has
all.
not changed, right?
Yeah, and but lately all of a sudden, I've been, I don't know if that has anything to do with the doctor was trying to cure that with using suppositories.
Okay. Mhm.
And then using certain suppository, I bleed more. And if I use plain hydrocortisone, it seems to work better than the other suppositories.
Mm.
So I don't know if
Yeah.
anybody else has the experience same experience that I had.
Yeah, that might be something for the rest of the group here to, I don't know if any other people have experienced something like this. Yeah,
You know, by the way, Lau brought to my mind one of the support, this group runs 2 support groups a month, one for newly diagnosed and one for that's an advanced sharing. And we give individual information. So at one of them, we talked about, you know, diet, and there were different people from different parts of the world, India, Africa, the Caribbean, and all of them, every one of these people said in their home country, they ate healthy, and then they came to the United States, and and
yeah,
you know, they develop, you know, the all these diseases, you know,
yeah,
that are you know, terrible diet that we promote in the United States.
right. Yeah,
So just mentioning that, you know, so
Yeah, but you know, my father basically ate Indian food, and actually, after my mother passed away, he switched to vegetarian food.
mm,
And but he also had the same problem, but at that time we were not aware of prostate cancer or things like that. He used to have the hematuria, and we, you know, in fact, I recently had the same hematuria, and I was a little bit scared, and now I found out that most old people get hematuria.
mm-hmm.
And I don't know if anybody else has a comment about that. If they know that hematuria is part of prostate cancer.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. You know, it can be caused by so many things. And so
Right.
trying to figure out what is underlying that, why is it happening? Why is it happening now? It can be associated with the cancer itself. It can be, you know, it can happen after, as you mentioned, after, you know, radiation therapy, and it can happen, you know,
Yeah.
many years afterwards.
I was wondering if Dr. Metzger might have any comment on that.
Yeah.
Not really. The very few of the people I took care of ever had hematuria with prostate cancer until it was well advanced. The early prostate cancer just doesn't have any symptoms, and that's one of the things that have been given up in prostate cancer is the national guidelines say the digital rectal exam is optional. Yet
Yeah.
there was a time when it was the only thing we had.
That's right. Yeah.
Before acid phosphatase and PSA became, now we have all these other tests, these biomarker tests and genetic tests. It's interesting that you included the genetic part, because most of the people that were trained 10 years ago or longer just don't have that part of their practice. It just is a natural thing to do. But look at how the precision treatments have come along with based on BRCA and all the other ones. And there'll be more to come, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
interesting how it changes.
I'd like to add one more thing. Maybe this Chuck Metzger, Dr. Metzger, might know something about. I went to a urologist, and he inserted a tube in my penis and said that my cancer was actually spread to my testicle. Now, or maybe when I had the radiation done, they missed it or what, but this was something new, and I had my radiation done about 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And
Well,
so,
with the newer radiation, precision radiations, I don't think that kind of stuff is happening anymore. The SBRT, MRI, PSMA guided is avoiding all of that. The old cobalt, you just everything happened, and it burned this, it burned that, it affected this, it affected that. And a small number of people that have radiation treatment still get secondary cancers. But I certainly have no experience with that particular combination.
Yeah.
all right, thank you.
Yeah. I wonder if it was it the testes, or could it have been the seminal vesicles maybe that seemed to be
Well, I just recently, as I said, I was had a hematuria, so I was
yeah.
scared to death. And so I went to Memorial Hospital, and they said, we don't know why it's causing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a little surprised.
Yeah.
They did not know. And then I went to my urologist, and he said that that's hematuria. And so I was surprised the hospital physician didn't know anything about hematuria.
Well,
I mean,
the causes are a lot. There are a lot of causes. The list is long, and you just have to start with at the top and work your way through.
Right.
Fortunately, we do have PSA, and even with all its faults, it's still the best thing that we
Yeah,
have, plus a
right.
bunch of other things. But it is not the most common cause of hematuria for sure.
and my urologist, of course, had me do the what they call it, the X-ray or whatever. There was fancy word now. They do the photographic of my lower part of my body, and now my primary physician is asking me to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if they couldn't find anything wrong with me except I mean the first time, as I said, in the hospital, Memorial Hospital, couldn't find anything.
Yeah. Well, hematuria involves X-rays, looking with a cystoscope, blood tests, cultures, and then if you can't find anything, you repeat. If it comes back, or if it doesn't come back, some people just repeat an ultrasound and see if anything has changed. But it can be elusive for sure.
Yeah, but as I said, Memorial didn't even know why that was happening, and my neurologist was actually able to pinpoint what the problem was more than even Memorial Hospital.
Yeah. Well, it is kind of a confusing symptom or problem. It needs a workup and it needs follow-up to be sure. The urine cytology is an often used, and with all of the techniques they're using now to study the urine DNA and the urine RNA and the list goes on, it's a lot more diagnostic than it used to be. So that's one thing. If they haven't done urine cytology, is a good thing to do.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, let's go to you next.
Thank you. This is going to sound trivial given the previous context, but I'm not going to complain about the potatoes, but I will complain about veggies. I would love to make them taste better. And the question then becomes, on the way through, you hinted that there was some studies perhaps going on about whether or not the spices being used or the herbs being used were somehow influential. And I don't like all the hot spices, but is there anything to suggest that some of these spices or herbs are worth looking at?
Yeah, no, it's such a great question. And, I think the evidence, it's so hard when you ask big groups of populations of people about what they eat. They oftentimes don't know what the spices are in the foods that they eat. But, I think there's a lot of interesting, my general sense would be find whatever herbs taste good to you to help you eat those vegetables, whether it's basil on the one hand, there's really interesting, again, not too much in people, but in cell line studies or in mice studies around turmeric. So some of the Indian spices are thought to be quite good. Any sort of herbs garlic, I think there's some interesting evidence around garlic. So I think anything that makes those, besides deep frying them, but again,
Right.
it's okay. It's okay to have it's okay to have I think that's the other thing about food for me is not only about health, but it's about family. It's about enjoying life. And it can be really fun to try maybe a cooking class and maybe do it with a friend or do it with a family member and try to see what you might like that it might be kind of different.
Yes.
A wonderful suggestion, just find joy, find fun in the veggies.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So when my wife mentions Old Spice, she's not talking about my age, right?
That's right.
Can I share something? I have lived in 4 different countries. And of course, originally I'm from India, but I was born in Pakistan, what is now used to be India. And then I lived in Indonesia. So the food was similar. Then I lived in Hong Kong. And of course, everybody knows about Chinese food. And when I first came to the United States, nobody knew anything much about Chinese food, but now they know a lot. So I have a different diets. I was eating American food too, like steak and all those things, which I enjoy too. But I don't eat as much as steaks. Hamburger I do sometimes when I go to McDonald's, maybe once or twice a week. But I don't know. I mean, it has probably nothing much to do with what you eat, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think there's, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No.
I see by the clock it's 6:30 here, so it means it's 9:30 for you.
It is,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
I want to thank you very much for joining us tonight and for spending your evening with us, and we look forward to having you back.
Yeah.
For people who are here, this will be on our website in a few days. Brian's going to put it up on our website under prostateforum.org presentations. We are working during the holidays. We will not have presentations or a board meeting, but you're welcome to join us on the 2nd and 4th Tuesday evenings from 5 to 7 p.m. Pacific, and we will continue support groups and information groups through the holiday. Doctor, I want to thank you so much for joining us and wish you all happy holidays if we don't see you before.
Wonderful. Happy Thanksgiving, and add some vegetables to your turkey
Eat
and mashed
vegetables.
potatoes, right? No, enjoy. Take a day and enjoy what you want to eat, and then and go for a walk instead, right? Exercise is
We're going to
great.
do that.
Oh,
Excellent.
let me add that, because we didn't publicize it yet, but we're going to have a walk to start the year off, where we're going to meet in Sail Beach, and we're all going to meet together and just have a pleasant walk and talk together, and hopefully we'll do this regularly through the rest of the year, because Dr. Mucci says exercise is where it's at, exercise and socialization, and we
Yeah,
need to do
absolutely.
it, right? So
Yeah,
that's what we're going
100%.
to do.
I couldn't agree more. That was a great way to end this. So thank you.
Thank you
you all
very
so much.
much.
Really wonderful to meet you all. Thank you.
We look
Take
forward to
care.
having you back.
Sounds great. Excellent. Bye-bye.
Bye
Happy
now.
holidays.
Right,
Happy
bye.
Happy holidays.